I'm Virginia Haxton, 68 years old, and on the day we buried my husband Lloyd, the sky pressed down so heavy it felt like even the air was mourning him. We'd spent 42 years together, most of it in the same modest house on the edge of New Braunfels. And now it felt too quiet, too big, too full of memories. A week later, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office. I'd never even heard of a man named Benjamin Teal with hollow cheeks and kind eyes. He reached into a folder and slid a photograph across the desk. What I saw made my breath catch: a white-columned mansion framed by cypress trees and early morning light. And before I could find the words, he said, "It's yours, Mrs. Haxton. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved." I grew up believing in quiet living, not just the kind where your voice stays soft, but where your choices stay simple, my mother used to say. Stretch every dollar and give more than you take, and I tried to live that way. I worked at the IRS for 40 years. Lloyd was an engineer at a small manufacturing plant. We didn't vacation much. We clipped coupons. We made things last. Lloyd and I shared everything. Or so, I believed we'd always been practical folks. We bought our little house in the early 80s and slowly fixed it up. We never owned anything fancy. Our couch was the same corduroy one from when Garrett was a teenager. The TV still had a thick frame around the screen, and I still hung my laundry out back when the weather was good. So, when Benjamin Teal handed me that picture of Cypress Grove and said, Lloyd had paid for it in full 5 years ago, I just stared at him. My husband had somehow bought a $7 million estate and never told me. I don't remember the drive home. I don't even remember locking the front door. All I know is I spent that night sitting in our living room, flipping through old photos, trying to find some clue. I must have missed the next morning. I found one buried in a stack of old receipts and handwritten notes. Was a small, spiral-bound notebook. On the inside page, Lloyd had written something dated 12 years back. Started Project CR. Virginia will never know. Surprise for old age. CR. For Cypress Grove. He'd been planning it for more than a decade. A few days later, I drove out to see the place myself. The GPS took me past the edge of town, down a narrow country road, lined with trees, and at the end was a tall stone wall and an iron gate. I entered the code from the papers, and the gates opened slow and silent, like something out of a movie. The house stood at the end of a long gravel driveway with cypress trees flanking both sides. It was grand, but not showy. The kind of place where you could hear wind across the porch and birds in the distance. Even with all that space, it felt private, peaceful. I walked through rooms I'd never dreamed of owning. Marble floors, curved staircases, windows that looked out over still water in the master bedroom. I found an envelope with my name in his handwriting. "My dear Jenny," he'd written. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I kept this a secret. I just wanted to surprise you for our 45th anniversary. I wanted to give you something beautiful. After all our years of sacrifice, he'd built it for me, and he died before he could show it to me back at home." I sat in the same kitchen where we'd had morning coffee for 4 decades and stared at the pale green cabinets we never got around to replacing. That's where Garrett found me later that afternoon. He and Willow came by unannounced, said they were checking in on me. I said, I'd just been out running errands. Willow tilted her head the way she does when she's trying to read between the lines. I offered tea, but they didn't really come for tea. They sat at the table where Garrett used to do his homework and started asking questions, gentle at first, then more pointed. They wanted to know if I'd thought about downsizing, if I needed help managing things, if I'd considered investing any of Lloyd's modest inheritance. Willow's voice was sweet, but her eyes weren't, and I couldn't forget what I'd overheard at Lloyd's wake her voice on the phone laughing about our old furniture, wondering what we might have left behind. I didn't say anything about Cypress Grove. Not that day, Not with Willow sitting across from me smiling with that same hungry edge I'd heard in her voice behind the lilac bushes that day at the funeral. I told them I was fine. I lied, and that night, while they drove away in their silver sedan, I sat back in my armchair and asked myself a question I still haven't answered. How do you protect something when you can't even tell your own son it exists, and how long before they find out? Anyway, by spring, I'd started splitting my weeks in two. Most people thought I was just spending time at the library or helping at church. But in truth, I was driving the old Camry out past the pecan groves, slipping through the black iron gates of Cypress Grove, and walking the wide halls of the house Lloyd had left behind. A house nobody else knew existed. Otis came by twice a week to tend the grounds. He was quiet, maybe 60 or so, with thick hands and a tired gait. Never asked questions. Just nodded, trimmed what needed trimming, and gave me updates when he noticed anything out of place. I trusted him more than most people by then. Back home, things weren't quiet. Willow had taken to visiting more often, usually under the guise of dropping off soup or checking on me after errands, but her eyes moved too quickly through the rooms. Her questions came too smoothly. Once I found her in my study thumbing through a drawer that had nothing to do with family photos. "Oh," she'd said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Garrett asked me to grab the photo albums from the filing cabinet. Thought they might be in here." I said nothing, just stood there with my arms crossed until she left the room. Garrett didn't call unless she was with him. When he did come by, it was with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the floor. If I tried to talk to him alone, Willow would find her way back into the conversation within minutes. The boy who used to ask me to walk him to school was now the man who couldn't look me in the eye. One Thursday, I was making tea in the kitchen when the phone rang. The voice on the line was polite, a little cautious. "Mrs. Haxton. My name's Harlan Drew. I live down the road from Cypress Grove. Otis gave me your number. I hope that's all right." He told me a woman had come around asking questions. Said she was looking at property in the area but asked a little too much about ownership, about who lived there, whether anyone stayed full-time. Slim, dark-haired, driving a silver sedan. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and stood there holding the receiver long after the call ended. Willow's car was silver, but I never told her about the house. I went to Cypress Grove the next morning. The air was damp and dew clung to the tall grass. Otis met me near the east fence, his brow furrowed. "Someone climbed over yesterday," he said, pointing to a piece of cloth caught on the barbed wire. "Left prints. Nothing taken far as I can tell. But I added a camera to that side. Old, but it works." I thanked him, checked the locks on the house myself, and walked through each room. Nothing seemed touched, but a feeling settled over me that didn't leave. It followed me back to town, all the way to my driveway where a silver sedan sat idling. I went through the side entrance quietly. The house felt off. Too quiet. A door creaked near the study. I hadn't left it open. The folders in my desk weren't where I left them. The box where I kept Lloyd's old paperwork had been disturbed, and the folder with the estate documents was missing. I barely had time to think when I heard the front door open and close, keys jingling. Garrett called out, "Mom?" He looked surprised to find me there. "Thought you were at your book club." I lied and said it was canceled. He mumbled something about picking up files from the study. I watched him walk and glance around, noticed the open drawers, the half-closed cabinet. Looking for something, I asked. "Old pictures," he said, quickly. Willow wanted to show her aunt. I nodded slowly. "He invited me to dinner that Saturday." "Just family?" he said, but something in his voice felt rehearsed. Something about his eyes told me he wasn't alone that day. Saturday came. Their house was in one of those newer neighborhoods, all matching shutters and manicured lawns. Willow opened the door bright as ever with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The living room furniture had changed, new leather sofa, marble-top coffee table. I knew their jobs. I knew their salaries. I didn't ask. Garrett handed me a glass of wine and complimented my dress. We sat down to a dinner of scallops and filet mignon with a bottle of wine that cost more than most of my grocery trips. I waited. It was over dessert when Willow cleared her throat and leaned in. "Virginia," she said, her voice soft. "We've been thinking a lot about the future, about children, about financial stability, especially after your loss." Garrett nodded beside her. "We just want to make sure everything's in place. You know Will's insurance estate matters." "My will is current," I said. "So is the insurance." Willow gave a tight smile. "But we haven't discussed it as a family, and these are family matters." I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. "You're right," I said. "They are." Garrett shifted in his seat. "It's not about control, Mom. We just want to know where things stand, in case something were to happen. Something like what I asked." He hesitated. Willow filled the silence. "Virginia, people your age can be vulnerable, easy to influence. Sometimes decisions get made that aren't entirely rational." I didn't say anything, just looked at her. Then she added, "We think Garrett should have had more clarity about what Lloyd left behind." The air in the room turned thick. Garrett looked at his hands. "Are you accusing me of hiding something I asked?" "We just want transparency," Willow said. "For everyone's sake." Garrett spoke up again. "Dad was always careful. If there was something, an investment, a property, we'd like to understand why it was kept secret." I stood. "If you have questions about Lloyd's estate, you can speak to his attorney." I grabbed my purse and headed toward the door. Garrett followed. "Mom, wait." I stopped. "You and Dad always thought I was weak," he said. "That I needed guidance. That I wasn't strong enough. He left everything to you. Not even a warning." I turned slowly. "Garrett," I said, "what are you talking about?" He swallowed. "Nothing. Doesn't matter." I left without another word. That night, I went straight to the study. The folder with the estate copies was gone. I drove to Cypress Grove to check the original documents. Everything in the safe was intact, but I found signs someone had been there. A perfume that wasn't mine. A door that wasn't latched. Otis called that night. Footage shows a silver car outside the gate around 4 p.m. A woman entered the grounds. Can't see her clearly. Dark hair. Slim build. I told him to change the code. He already had. That week I made an appointment with Mariah Q., the attorney who'd helped after Lloyd passed. I told her everything. She listened carefully and said, "We'll need to act fast. First step is locking down the estate legally. Then we figure out who's behind this." 3 days later, she introduced me to a man named Bivens, former law enforcement, now a private investigator. Quiet, unshakable. He sat across from me, opened a file, and said, "Your daughter-in-law hired a man. Reiner. Not exactly the cleanest. He's been following you, especially your visits to Cypress Grove. He also accessed Lloyd's banking records. Illegally." He turned another page. "This man here," he said, pointing to a photo of Willow at a cafe with a sharp-featured man in a suit, "is a lawyer named Palmer Wolf. She met with him 2 days ago." Then he paused. "And there's one more thing," he said. "I ran a background check. Willow Sage used to go by Willow Price. She changed her name at 21. 2 former employers accused her of misconduct. 1 inheritance case was flagged. Nothing ever stuck, but it's not a clean history." I looked at the photos. I didn't recognize the woman in them, but I knew what I had to do next, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. After Bivens left Mariah's office, I stayed behind a little longer. She poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and slid one across the desk. Neither of us said much at first. She just sat there flipping through pages while I stared at a corner of the room that held a potted fern and a faded framed photo of her law school graduation. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected. Do you really think Garrett knows what she's doing? Mariah looked up slowly. Only one way to find out. The next morning, I called my son. Asked if he could meet me for lunch. Just the two of us. To my surprise, he agreed. We picked a small place near the edge of town, family-owned simple tables, red and white checkered tablecloths. The kind of place we used to go after Sunday errands when he was still in school. He looked tired when he arrived, thinner than I remembered. His collar hung a little looser around his neck. We ordered coffee, then sat in silence long enough for it to cool. Finally, I said, "You've been carrying something, Garrett." He didn't deny it, just gave a small nod, stared at the cup between his hands. "We're in debt," he said quietly. "More than I can fix. Credit cards, the house alone we can't keep up with. Willow, she's the one who manages the accounts." I didn't know how bad it had gotten until it was too late. I didn't interrupt, just waited. She found some paperwork he went on, after Dad died. Something about Cypress Grove. She asked me about it, but I didn't know what she meant. Then she started pushing. Said we needed to get ahead of it. Said you were hiding something. His voice trailed off. "She hired someone, didn't she?" I asked. He nodded again. "A guy named Reiner. Said it was just to confirm a few things, but then she started coming home with printouts, bank details, photos. Said it was your fault we were struggling, that Dad left everything to you and we had nothing, that it wasn't fair." I folded my napkin once, then again. "Do you think that's true?" Garrett looked up then. His eyes were worn, not angry, not cruel, just tired. I don't know what to think anymore. I feel like I've been watching my own life through a window, like someone else is driving, and I can't reach the wheel. I asked how much they owed. When he told me, I blinked but didn't respond. After a long pause, he said, "She wants to sue. Says we can contest the will. That you're not thinking clearly. That it could go in our favor." I kept my hands still. "What about you, Garrett?" I asked. "Do you think I'm not capable of handling what your father left me?" He flinched. "I didn't say that, but you agreed with her." He took a breath and let it out slowly. "She said it was the only way out." "She told you I was mentally unfit," I said. He looked away. She used different words. There wasn't much more to say. The check came. He reached for it out of habit, then hesitated. I paid in silence. Back home, I sat on the couch and looked at old photos for hours. Garrett as a toddler on Lloyd's shoulders. The three of us at the Grand Canyon, sunburned and smiling. A snapshot of him at 12, grinning wide, his arm slung around my shoulder. I turned the pages slowly. I wasn't sure what hurt more, what he'd done or how easily he'd done it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 10:30, the doorbell rang. Willow stood outside, coat buttoned up to her chin, face tight with frustration. "We need to talk," she said, walking in without waiting. "About lunch, about Garrett, about the estate." I closed the door behind her. She didn't sit, just stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. "You've been keeping secrets," she said. "And now we know. You can't hide it anymore. We deserve a share." "You broke into my house," I said. "You stole documents, trespassed on my property, and now you're telling me what I deserve." She didn't blink. "I'm giving you a chance to settle this privately. Sign over part of the estate. Put Garrett on the deed. Or we take this to court. For what I asked. For guardianship," she said. "For financial control. You're grieving Virginia. You've become paranoid, withdrawn. You're not well. It's affecting your decisions." I didn't move. You think a judge will buy that? I think I've seen it happen, she said, and I know how to play it. I opened the door. Then I suggest you start preparing. She stared at me for a long moment, then walked out. The next day, I told Mariah everything. She didn't flinch. We'll get ahead of it, she said. You'll need updated medical records, cognitive evaluations, letters from neighbors' coworkers, anything that shows stability and competence. She tapped her pen on the desk. We'll build the case before they even file. I spent the next several days gathering paperwork, meeting with doctors, making calls. Otis added more cameras around the estate. Bivens kept digging. Every day felt like sand running through a funnel, controlled but fast. Then came the message. Mom, Garrett said on the answering machine, his voice flat. We're coming by tomorrow at 2. We need to talk. All of us. I played it twice, then I called Mariah. I'll be there at 1:30, she said. Let's be ready. Mariah arrived early, just like she said she would. She parked at the end of the drive and came up the walk with a slim leather folder tucked under her arm. I'd made a pot of coffee, set out a tray of shortbread cookies she wouldn't eat, and pulled back the living room drapes to let in the light. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, books maybe, or memory. By 1:45, we were both seated, calm, waiting. They pulled up at exactly 2. Garrett was behind the wheel. Willow stepped out in a fitted coat, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back tight. She walked ahead of him like always. Garrett hesitated at the base of the porch stairs before following. Mariah stood as they entered. Willow, Garrett. Her voice was cool but polite. Willow offered a tight smile. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Garrett didn't look at me. We sat. Mariah opened her folder and set a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. Before we begin, she said, let's be clear. This is not a negotiation. You requested a meeting. We agreed. That's all. Willow placed a white envelope beside the paper. This is our proposal. Garrett and I believe it's fair, considering the assets and your current condition. Mariah didn't flinch. My client's condition is stable and documented. Willow ignored her, turned to me instead. Virginia, this doesn't have to be difficult. We're not asking for everything. Just a portion. A single property, Cypress Grove. Garrett was Lloyd's son, his only child. It's only right he carry on that legacy. I looked at Garrett. You agree with this? His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Mariah opened the envelope. Inside were typed pages, 3 copies of a revised estate plan and a transfer deed. You've already prepared documents, she said. Willow folded her hands. In case you came to your senses. Mariah slid the pages back across the table. They're not binding, and my client will not be signing anything today. Willow's voice sharpened. Then we'll move forward with the petition. Elder incapacity, mental decline. We have records, witnesses. Mariah didn't blink. So do we. Silence settled in the room, the kind that thickens the air and makes clocks tick louder than usual. Then Garrett spoke. We can't afford to fight this, Mom. You don't understand what it's like. The debt, the pressure. We need a way out. Mariah said nothing. I leaned forward. I offered help, Garrett. Months ago. You said no. You didn't want a gift. You wanted control. Willow cut in. He needed stability. A future. You wanted a deed? I said quietly. She stood. We'll see you in court. They left without another word. Mariah exhaled slowly. We move now, she said. They'll file within the week, and they'll push hard. The petition came 3 days later. Filed in county probate court. claiming diminished capacity, improper asset handling, failure to notify beneficiaries. A quiet war had begun. Over the next month, Mariah and I met with evaluators, financial experts, and 2 character witnesses. My primary care physician submitted a full report, stable alert, mentally sound. Otis wrote a statement confirming I visited the estate weekly, managed all maintenance, and had made improvements to the grounds over the last year. Garrett's petition leaned heavily on Willow's documentation. She included photos of the safe at Cypress Grove, printouts of my home security logs, quotes pulled from emails and messages, and a carefully selected list of inconsistencies. They painted me as isolated, paranoid, obsessive. Mariah built a wall of paperwork. She added medical records, phone logs, investment statements, and tax filings. Bivens gave us the full report on Reiner, including the forged bank access, the trespass footage, and photos of Willow meeting with Palmer Wolf outside a courthouse in Little Rock. The case, Mariah said, was turning, but it would still come down to the hearing. It was scheduled for the second Tuesday in May. I wore a navy skirt suit with low heels and a pearl brooch Lloyd had given me on our 25th anniversary. Mariah met me at the courthouse steps and took my arm as we walked in. Garrett and Willow sat across the aisle. She whispered to him constantly, even as the judge entered the room. The hearing was private. Just us, their attorney, the judge, and a court officer. Mariah opened with a clean statement. This is not a matter of confusion or incapacity. It is a matter of coercion, of entitlement, and of a deliberate attempt to seize control of a fully competent widow's estate. She introduced the documents in quiet order. The judge listened, asked measured questions, took notes. When Willow's turn came, her tone shifted. Soft concern, carefully phrased worry. We love Virginia, she said, but grief clouds judgment, and Garrett has a right to understand the legacy he was denied. The judge asked Garrett to speak. He rose, voice low. I never meant to hurt my mother. I wanted to protect what Dad left behind. The judge nodded, took notes again. Then it was my turn. I stood, hands steady at my sides. I buried my husband a year ago, I said. We were married 43 years. He left his estate to me because he trusted me to handle it. I've kept that promise. Quietly, carefully. And I've watched my only son be led into something he doesn't fully understand. The judge thanked me, asked one final question. Have you considered mediation? Mariah said firmly. We are not open to settlement. My client requests dismissal and a formal injunction. The judge excused us while he deliberated. We waited in the hallway for 45 minutes. When we were called back, the judge read his ruling aloud. The petition was denied. No guardianship, no financial oversight, no hearing extension. Mariah leaned over and whispered, That's the win. But it's not the end. As we walked out, Garrett didn't look at me. Willow watched us go, her eyes sharp and unreadable. Outside, the sky was heavy with early summer heat. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I wasn't going to wait quietly for their next move. The hearing ended on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the locks at Cypress Grove had been changed. Otis replaced the entire security system with new codes only he and I had access to. The gate was reinforced, the driveway sensors updated. I called the local bank and reissued all access credentials to the estate account. Mariah advised I hold off on selling anything, just keep things secure and documented. Still, I felt something shifting. Something quiet, but permanent. That weekend, I drove out to the property alone. The air smelled of pine and last year's leaves. I walked the perimeter, boots crunching over gravel, pausing to check where the rear fencing met the creek. Otis had left a report in the mailbox detailing a late-night car he didn't recognize. Nothing had happened. Just parked near the side trail and gone in 10 minutes. Still, I took it seriously. Inside the main house, everything looked undisturbed. The safe room was sealed. The hallway closet where Lloyd used to keep his records was just as he'd left it. I stood in that narrow space for several minutes, one hand resting on the old metal filing drawer. There was a draft in the house I hadn't noticed before. That afternoon, I called Bivens, asked if he could meet me on site the following week. I wanted another sweep this time through every square foot of both houses and the back shed. I think there's something Willow didn't find, I told him. Something she was looking for and still hasn't gotten her hands on. He came Monday morning quiet and focused as always. Walked through the house with a handheld scanner checking walls and floorboards. He stopped briefly at the guest room, paused near a vent, removed the cover and reached inside. Nothing there. Still, it told him what he needed. This place was searched, he said. Carefully, but not professionally. He spent the next few hours checking corners, testing the safe's hinge for tampering. When he got to the workshop, he stopped near the old sink in the back and traced a line on the wall with his palm. "What's on the other side of this?" he asked. I told him it should be empty space the way the roof sloped. There was no usable room back there. He shined a flashlight and knocked twice. The sound wasn't hollow. He turned. "You got tools?" I brought him the old kit from the basement. He used a short pry bar to gently loosen one of the wooden panels. Behind it, we found a false wall. And inside, documents. Boxes of them, tightly packed in plastic tubs with faded labels, inventory, 1987 to 1999, grant proposals, donor lists, and one marked simply Willow Sage. I sat down on the stool as he opened it. The first envelope contained a copy of a birth certificate. Not Willow's, but a girl named Lacey Summers. Same date of birth, same hometown, different parents. The second file had a sealed envelope postmarked 2009, addressed to a law firm in Fort Smith. Unopened. Beside it, a sheet of paper with 3 names and phone numbers. The third document was a legal declaration, unsigned, outlining the adoption of a minor under a private guardianship statute. The signature line was blank, but the witness box listed a familiar name. "Palmer Wolf," I said aloud. Bivens nodded. "Looks like she's not who she says she is." We boxed everything and loaded it into his truck. I didn't speak for most of the drive back. When we pulled up to my house, I turned to him and said, "I want to know where the real Willow Sage is, and I want to know what this woman's endgame was from the start." The next day, Mariah cleared her schedule and spent 6 hours reviewing the files. She highlighted dates flagged inconsistencies and called in a records analyst to verify the authenticity. By that Friday, we had enough to build a timeline, and what we saw made our stomachs turn. The woman calling herself Willow had legally changed her name twice before marrying Garrett. Each name change had been filed in a different state. The addresses were always temporary housing units, the witnesses either deceased or unreachable. She'd married once before under a different name, annulled it 2 months later, then disappeared. Bivens got a tip from someone in Pulaski County who remembered seeing her on a fraud watch list back in 2011, flagged under the name Lacey Summers. No conviction, but she'd vanished before a court date. Mariah asked if I wanted to go to the authorities. "Not yet," I said. "Let's finish the puzzle." That weekend, I drove out to Cypress Grove again. Alone. Walked the rooms with a notebook, wrote down everything Lloyd had ever told me about that place. The donors, the renovations, the summer programs. I sat at the dining room table and imagined how long Willow had been planning this. How carefully she must have studied us, married Garrett, fed him stories, waited for Lloyd to pass. She'd aimed for the estate, but what she wanted was something else. The day we found the 4th storage unit, I didn't know what to expect. Bivens had followed a paper trail from one of the addresses on the name change applications. A receipt tucked inside an envelope labeled Carson, dated 3 years prior, showed recurring monthly payments to a self-storage facility in Jonesboro. The name on the lease wasn't Willow's or Lacey's. It was someone named Hannah Reeves. But the signature was hers. Mariah arranged access through the court since the name tied to Willow's known aliases. We drove up just after sunrise. The manager met us at the gate and walked us to Unit 117. The door rolled up slow, catching at the bottom. It smelled like old cardboard and motor oil. There were 8 boxes, 1 heavy trunk, and 2 plastic tubs stacked near the back. Mariah snapped photos while Bivens started sorting through. The trunk was locked. The rest wasn't. 1 box held documents, receipts, handwritten notes, partial bank statements, printouts of emails. Another had clothing, baby clothes. 2 tiny shoes wrapped in tissue, a hospital wristband. Mariah paused. She had a child. We laid the documents out across the floor. Several pages were court filings, guardianship petitions, none of them completed. One was filed in Mississippi under the name Lacey Summers, attempting to claim custody of a girl named Haley. The petition had been denied. No follow-up. Beneath that, a folder labeled Mendocino. Inside letters, dozens of them, addressed to someone named Everett Carson. The handwriting was small and tense. "Everett, I know what I did. I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to listen. They lied to us. She was never supposed to be taken. You said you'd burn everything. But I need proof. I need the deed, the old one. I think they're coming back for it." It wasn't signed, but the return address matched one of the older properties Garrett had mentioned, an old mill in Arkansas that had burned down 7 years ago. Mariah stopped reading. She wasn't just after the estate, she said. She was hiding something bigger. Bivens cracked open the locked trunk using bolt cutters. Inside was a collection of ledgers, handwritten, organized by year. Donations, payments, names. Most of them were legitimate donors from Lloyd's Foundation days. But some entries were flagged, underlined, pending, owed, deferred. The amounts were large. At the bottom of one ledger, a note read, "Sage, $250K held. Release, pending legal clearance." Mariah took a photo. "That's Garrett's last name." "Not hers," I said. "She kept her maiden name when they married." She never touched Lloyd's estate directly, but she marked this under Sage. We drove straight back to Mariah's office and spent the next 2 days assembling a report. Garrett hadn't signed anything, but Willow had built a financial trail under his last name, enough to link the missing money from the foundation's dormant account to a pending trust release Lloyd had delayed before his passing. "Your husband suspected her," Mariah said. "He didn't have proof at the time, but he paused the trust." She never got to it. On Monday morning, I requested a full audit of the Cypress Grove Foundation records. That triggered a notification to the Arkansas Board of Nonprofit Compliance. Within 48 hours, a temporary freeze was placed on all distributions. 2 days later, we received word that the audit had uncovered fraudulent filings under the Sage name submitted 18 months ago, with forged signatures and false addresses. The release was halted. Willow had tried to trigger the payout early using Garrett's name as the surviving heir. But she had filed the paperwork before Lloyd's death had been certified. It was rejected. Still, she had kept the framework in place, waiting for Garrett to push through a court order. Mariah sent the entire report to the Fraud Division of the State Attorney General's office. Bivens added the aliases, the sealed envelope, the name changes. That night, Garrett showed up at my house. He stood at the edge of the porch for a long time. I opened the screen door and waited. "She's gone," he said. I didn't answer. "She left yesterday. Took the car, the safe key, everything. I found a burner phone in the garage with 6 voicemails from someone named Carson. I don't even know who that is." I stepped outside. "She planned this long before she met you." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." He looked older, thinner. "She was tracking the trust," I said. "It was never about you." "I think I loved her," he said quietly. "But I never knew who she really was." I watched him for a moment, then opened the door wider. "You'd better come in. There's more you need to see." The day the lawsuit was dropped, I didn't cry. I didn't pour a glass of wine or slam the front door shut behind me like someone in a movie. I just sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the one facing the garden, and watched a bird pull threads from the old wind chime by the window. Mariah had called first thing that morning. Willow hadn't responded to discovery requests. The judge issued a warning. Then just after 9:30, her attorney filed a voluntary dismissal. No explanation, no counterclaim. It was over. I hadn't heard from Garrett since the night he came to the porch, but that afternoon he showed up again. Not with legal papers or tension in his jaw. He looked tired, but clearer. The kind of clear that comes after something heavy breaks. He stood in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets. "She called me this morning," he said. "Said to tell you she was sorry. Said you'd understand." I didn't answer. "I'm filing for divorce," he added. I nodded once. "When already started the paperwork. I just wanted you to hear it from me." He sat down across from me at the table. The last time he did that, he was still in high school, eating cereal after practice and teasing me about the smell of lavender detergent. He looked older now, less like Lloyd, more like himself. I read everything he said. The letters, the filings, the ledgers. I waited. She was going to take everything he said, finally. And I helped her. I let her in. I folded my hands on the table. I don't know what kind of man that makes me. "You were misled," I said quietly. He looked down at his shoes. "Doesn't make it right." I reached for the folder beside me, the same one Lloyd used to keep our tax records in. Inside was the new trust agreement Mariah had drafted the week before. I slid it across to him. "What's this?" he asked. "It's the updated structure." "You're still the heir," I said, "but it's locked until I pass, and the estate can't be leveraged or borrowed against. Not for any reason. I wanted it in writing." He didn't touch the folder. "You're still letting me inherit." "You're my son," I said. He didn't speak after that, just nodded once, then reached out and pushed the folder back toward me. "I don't need it. Not like that. Not anymore." "Then you'll agree to the terms. I'll sign whatever you want," he said. "I don't want to be a part of anything that hurts you." The next morning, Garrett met with Mariah and signed the new documents. Everything was formalized. A clause was added removing Willow from any access retroactive to their wedding date. Her name was expunged from all pending filings. I received confirmation from the Attorney General's office the following week. The fraud investigation against Willow was officially opened. Charges weren't guaranteed, but a case had been built. They had enough to pursue civil penalties. Possibly more if any of the filings crossed into federal jurisdictions. A certified letter arrived 2 days later. It was from Willow. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no acknowledgement, just 4 lines. "You played it well. But I wasn't the only one watching. Be careful what you think you've cleaned up. The estate never belonged to you. It never will." I burned it in the sink. Later that week, Garrett called again. He wanted to visit the estate, not to move in, just to see it, to see what Lloyd had built, to understand what had almost been lost. I agreed. We drove up together for the first time. The gates opened the way they always did, slow and silent. The gravel curved under the wheels like a quiet hush. Garrett stepped out and stood in front of the main house with his hands still in his pockets. He didn't ask to go inside. He just looked. "Dad really did all this he asked?" "He did," I said. "He wanted to show it to you someday. The right way." Garrett turned toward the trees. He always said he'd surprise us one day. I thought he meant with a vacation. A fishing trip, maybe. I looked toward the tree line. This was his surprise. We didn't speak after that, just stood there in the long stretch of silence that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't anger either. It was something else, something quieter. As we got back in the car, Garrett reached into his jacket and handed me a key. "It's to the storage unit," he said. "There's nothing left in it. Just thought you should have it." I nodded. "Thank you." He paused before starting the engine. "Do you think he knew I looked down at the key in my palm?" "I think he suspected, and I think he trusted me to finish it." We drove back in silence. The estate sat quiet that morning. I hadn't been back since Garrett and I stood by the trees. The leaves had turned since then burnt orange and deep crimson, the kind that only show up for a few short weeks before winter dulls everything. I walked the gravel path slowly, the air cool against my face, a scarf wrapped tight at my throat. Mariah met me near the greenhouse, holding a folded envelope in her hand. "It's done," she said. "All signatures and filings confirmed. The trust is active, secured, and irrevocable." I took the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. I added something else, she said. "Per your request." I nodded. "The scholarship." She smiled. "Set to launch next fall. We've named it after Lloyd." We stood there in the garden, surrounded by rows of rosemary and sage that had started to silver. The same garden Lloyd planted himself all those years ago when we had barely enough to pay the water bill and no idea what was coming. I walked the property alone for a while after Mariah left. Stopped by the work shed, ran my hand along the edge of the old oak bench Lloyd built with Garrett one summer when he was 16. The initials they carved, G+L, barely visible now, but still there. Later that week, I drove back to town, dropped off the key to the storage unit at the locksmith's office. I asked them to melt it down and donate the brass to the local metalworking class. Something new, I told them. Something useful. Garrett called that evening. He'd started volunteering at the community food pantry. Said he wanted to keep busy. I told him I thought that was a good idea. He didn't mention Willow, and I didn't ask. Some things are better left in silence. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. No name on the return label, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a blank card. Nothing written. Just an ultrasound photo tucked into the fold. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it back into the envelope and placing it on the mantel. Not to display, just to remember. Time passed. Winter settled in, and the garden went quiet. Snow dusted the top of the greenhouse, and the old wind chime swayed gently on its hook. I sat most mornings by the fire, knitting small things I didn't need: mittens, scarves, baby socks. I sent them to the hospital downtown. Anonymous donations, no tags, no notes. Eventually, I began sorting the attic. Lloyd's boxes, my old teaching files, Garrett's drawings from grade school. Things you don't realize you've kept until they're all in one place, waiting for you to decide what still matters. Somewhere near the bottom of a cedar trunk, I found a letter from Lloyd. It was dated 2 years before he died. He'd written it after we paid off the final loan on the estate. "I built this for you," it said. "Not the land, not the walls, but the freedom to never need anyone's permission again. Protect that. Let it outlive both of us." I folded it gently and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. It does outlive us, I think. Dignity. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need applause. I still wear my wedding band. Not because I'm holding on, but because it reminds me where I came from and who I built a life with. The estate isn't just land and stone. It's proof. That fairness can be restored. That greed doesn't get the last word. That love, real love, leaves a record deeper than ink, or titles, or court filings. So, if you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late to speak up, it isn't. And if you've ever protected something, your name, your worth, Your peace. Just know. Someone sees it, even if they never say so. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story sat with you, share it with someone you trust. And don't forget to hold on to the quiet things. They're often the strongest.